Well, I mean, some of these, like the paper chain, is pretty inside the box, but it's day 5 of Craftmas, my 5-part series where I explore the history of Christmas decorations. We've looked now at the wreath, the garland, the ornament, and the stocking. And now we're on to our last craft. Our last holiday decoration is actually not really a decoration in itself, but it is decorative. And that is the wrapping paper on presents. I really love wrapping presents, and so I wanted to look at the history of this and then play around with my own type of wrapping paper. So trying to get away from paper was part of my idea for my wrapping, because it did bother me a little bit, the idea of how much waste is coming out of Christmas time. I looked to cloth wrapping options, and I apologize in advance for the pronunciation, but in Japan during the Edo period, furoshiki is a pretty traditional type of wrapping, and I've seen it come back in popularity, and it's beautiful cloth wrapping. And then during the Three Kingdoms period, bojagi in Korea was very popular, and that is short formed often to just bo, which is wrapping happiness or fortune. I decided to go with the Korean form of cloth wrapping. I really resonated with the idea of happiness and fortune being part of what I would be wrapping and the thought behind the wrapping process. And I found that the patchwork scrap is actually called chogakbo. That's what I decided to go with for my wrapping paper, my final Christmas decoration. Unfortunately, I don't have the traditional types of fabric that would be used. I only had cotton because I was trying to stick with materials that I actually had here, and I found a version of the wrapping cloth that was a patchwork. So often scraps of fabric would be saved by the women of the household who were making clothes and whatnot for the family, and they would use those scraps to create these patchwork cloth wrappings. And I really loved that, again, because it ties back into the trying not to waste during the holidays and keep as much of the materials that you're using in functionality as possible. So I grabbed a bunch of little scraps of fabric that I do keep, off prints that I have of different screen printed textiles, and scraps that I've cut off from doing other projects. I gathered all of those and I created a wrapping paper from that. It took a very long time, so I only made one, but I feel like I would definitely do it again. I really enjoyed the process. When beginning the research for wrapping paper, I ended up starting with the gifts section of the book that I've mentioned a couple times, Stories Behind the Great Traditions of Christmas. It began with the presents that were given to Jesus right after his birth, so gold, frankincense, and myrrh. I thought it was interesting because I actually didn't know very much about these particular gifts in reference to that actual situation. So gold, obviously very sought after and highly unusual to give to a child unless that child was a king. Frankincense, being a symbol of worship, something I didn't know was that it was actually a sacred tree and only those pure of heart and mind were allowed near it during that time. So that was an interesting bit of information. And then myrrh, which was a resin used in burial ceremonies, incredibly rare and very costly, so a super unique present, but also very odd. This is what I discovered. It was written in the book saying it would be like bringing a coffin to a baby shower. So that was very strange. Interesting in the sense that these wise men clearly understood what Jesus's life was going to be, and these presents reflected that understanding. But the action of giving presents wasn't something that originated with Christmas or Jesus's birth. Giving gifts during the winter time was again linked with winter solstice. So the Romans would give gifts partially because I found written that giving gifts, like showing generosity, would bring good fortune in the new year. But in the 4th century, when December 24th was sort of set as a day to remember Christ's birth, and winter solstice celebrations were sort of losing popularity, the gift giving became a component of the celebration of Christ's birth. Another element that I found that again connects to this Roman tradition was that gift giving happened more in the new year, so a new year gift. And this tradition lasted until the time of Queen Victoria. Another element that I found in the book was that there was a period of time in Europe when kings and queens actually wrote into rule that the subjects had to give them Christmas gifts. So basically the opposite of the St. Nicholas story. So instead of the rich giving to the poor and helping the poor, it was literally the poor having to give to the rich by a ruling that they couldn't dispute or get away from. In the 10th century, a Bohemian duke remembered as King Wenceslas decided to flip the script, didn't want to do this give me gifts scenario, and started to give gifts to his subjects. So spread joy around the kingdom, bringing food and firewood and clothing, etc., to those in need. This concept carried on, and William the Conqueror also followed suit. And then during sort of the Martin Luther era Germany, there was like a lot of love and respect for the concepts of King Wenceslas and St. Nicholas, and so giving gifts became very popular. And at the time, gifts were actually given anonymously, so you wouldn't know who was actually giving you the gift that you received. The Dutch sort of expanded on this, and they turned gift giving into a scavenger hunt, which I absolutely adore. And then the Danes actually went further, and this is something I did so much when I was younger, and I considered doing it for this section, but where you would sort of make like a tower of gifts, like a little gift inside a bigger gift, inside a bigger gift, inside a bigger gift. So you didn't really know the size of gift you were actually getting, because you would just get this giant box that would have a whole bunch of little boxes. And what I found was that they would write different names in each of the boxes, so it would sort of pass hands as well, and then eventually end up with the person who the gift was actually for. So I really liked that idea. Then, again, with our lovely legendary poem, The Night Before Christmas, everybody the whole world kind of got on board with gift giving. So it was sort of in Europe that mostly the gift giving was happening. The British and the New World weren't really interested in gift giving. Christmas was really just about a celebration and remembrance of Christ's birth. It wasn't about exchanging gifts. But then with The Night Before Christmas and the Christmas Carol, this kind of concept changed, and people started getting more interested in exchanging gifts over the holidays. This is also, really coming close to the time when the New Year's gift tradition sort of falls to the wayside, and it kind of lost its prevalence, which is kind of a bummer because it was like a 2,000-year-old tradition that just vanished. Then I abandoned the research on gifts in general, and I looked more at wrapping paper. And I found some articles in The Atlantic and Mental Floss where they talk about the history of wrapping paper. And the Atlantic article is where I pull a lot of this information. And they mention that we might look back on wrapping paper and think, what were we thinking? Because it is estimated that in the USA alone, about 5 million tons of additional waste happens over Christmas, and a good portion of that is gift wrapping. So that started to really impact my decision not to do the layered present within a present within a present idea. Wrapping paper was a luxury for a good period of time amongst the upper class, and they would wrap these beautiful, elaborate presents with ribbons and lace, and what I read to be a very unwieldy type of paper, so not the easiest paper to wrap with. And then tissue paper sort of replaced that annoying paper because it was a lot easier to work with. And I read, this was in the Atlantic article, that in 1917, two brothers in Kansas who owned a stationery store ran out of the tissue paper during the holidays that everybody wanted to wrap their presents with. Of course, they didn't want to, close up shop and not sell more things during the holidays, so they decided to try selling this paper liner that was for envelopes from France as a replacement for tissue paper, and it became like a super hit, and it was the Hall brothers of Hallmark, so we can thank them for the type of wrapping paper that we use now. Well, that concludes my 5 holiday crafts decorations for my Craftmas special. I really loved going down this path and getting to learn more about these traditions and play with the themes and the concepts for my 2020 decorations, and also tie in my love for research and thinking outside the box. And well, I mean, some of these, like the paper chain, is pretty inside the box, but thinking about the reasons for why we do certain things, what they mean, how they tie into our past, and how I can relate them to the present. So thank you so much for joining me on this little craft adventure, and I'm excited to see what comes in 2021. Before you go, we just want to say a big thank you to all of our patron supporters. You are what make videos like this happen. Your support is so wonderful, and we love that we're able to use it to create interesting and fun videos like this. If you're not a patron supporter, but you're inspired by the stories of St. Nicholas, or perhaps the 2,000-year-old tradition of giving during the new year, the link to our Patreon is below in the description box. Thanks so much for hanging out with me. Talk to you soon.